Dockhands don't belong at the junior orientation. They laughed when the dockhand showed up to the yacht club orientation. Said the membership list wasn't for people who tie knots for a living, and told him to stay behind the service ropes. Then he calmly checked the wind, the tide, and the horizon, because within an hour they'd be begging him to take command. Sometimes the sea decides who truly belongs. Before I show you the exact moment when the Coast Guard commander stepped off the cutter and saluted him on the dock. By the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. Beneath the pressed white linens and polished hulls, something far more powerful than wealth was about to surface. He didn't argue, didn't step forward to defend himself. He simply rested a calloused hand on the edge of the dock and watched the water the way other men watched stock tickers. Caleb Mercer had learned long ago that the ocean didn't care about status. The marina shimmered in late afternoon light, rows of gleaming yachts rocking gently in their slips. White canvas covers snapped faintly in the breeze. The air smelled of salt, diesel, and expensive sunscreen. Champagne glasses clinked on the terrace where Seabridge Yacht Club members gathered for the youth sailing orientation. Beside him stood Luca, clutching a folded scholarship form with fingers that tried not to tremble. "Dad," the boy whispered, eyes fixed on the polished boats, "it's okay if we just watch." He crouched to his son's level, voice low and steady. "We're not just watching." Across the dock, Commodore Victoria Langford adjusted her sunglasses and surveyed the gathering with practiced authority. Her navy blazer bore the club crest stitched in gold thread. Around her clustered families dressed in crisp whites and boat shoes that had never touched engine grease. Her gaze landed on them again. "Orientation is for registered members and approved candidates," she announced coolly, not raising her voice but ensuring it carried. "Staff may observe from the service line." A few parents smirked. One man chuckled openly. "Guess the help wants sailing lessons." Luca's shoulders stiffened. The dockhand felt it instantly. The way a child absorbs dismissal like a tide soaking into sand. He straightened slowly. "I submitted the scholarship application," he said evenly. He qualified on the written portion. Victoria's smile was tight. "And we appreciate initiative. But legacy considerations matter." Legacy. The word floated between them like a polished buoy marking invisible boundaries. Harold Bennett, an older member leaning on a silver-tipped cane, cleared his throat softly. His eyes moved from the boy to the man beside him, lingering a second longer than the others. The breeze shifted. Subtle, slightly cooler. He glanced toward the open channel beyond the breakwater. The water had darkened a shade deeper than forecast. A low band of clouds formed along the horizon, thin, almost unnoticeable to the untrained eye. "Winds veering southeast earlier than predicted," he murmured, mostly to himself. Harold's brow lifted. "You see that too?" He gave a small nod. Victoria continued her address, gesturing toward a ceremonial sale planned for investors later that afternoon. "The children will observe from the terrace while our members demonstrate proper handling." Another ripple of laughter circled. Luca swallowed. "I can handle a tiller," he said quietly. "I practiced at the public pier." A woman nearby arched an eyebrow. The public pier? As if the phrase itself were contamination. His jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "He learns fast." The Commodore glanced at her clipboard. "We'll review all applications after today's demonstration. Until then, please remain behind the ropes." The rope barrier lay coiled near a cleat, symbolic and unnecessary, yet unmistakable. He guided Luca toward the edge of the dock without protest. Because storms didn't announce themselves loudly at first. They hinted. The wind lifted again, sharper this time. A halyard slapped against a mast in uneven rhythm. Seagulls shifted direction mid-flight. He felt it in his bones before he measured it with sight. The ceremonial yacht, Silver Crest, prepared to depart with several high-profile guests aboard. Victoria's nephew stood near the stern, waving confidently. Engines hummed to life. Harold leaned closer. "You think they should delay?" "Yes," he answered simply. The older man's gaze sharpened. "Then say so." He studied the yacht's position relative to the outer channel and the narrowing tide window. Calculations formed automatically, silent and precise. "I will," he said quietly. Behind them, Luca looked from the boat to his father, sensing something shift, not in the sky, but in the man beside him. The laughter hadn't stopped, but neither had the wind. It cut sharper now, tugging at the signal flags above the marina office and snapping them hard against their lines. The water beyond the breakwater shifted from glassy blue to a darker, restless gray. Most of the families on the terrace didn't notice. They were too busy clapping as the Silver Crest eased away from the dock. Luca watched the yacht with wide eyes. "They're really going out?" "Yes," he said quietly. Victoria Langford stood near the bowline as it was cast off, smiling for a cluster of donors holding their phones high. "A perfect afternoon for a sail," she declared, as if the horizon answered her. He stepped forward just enough to be heard. "Commodore, the barometer dropped 3 points in 20 minutes. The channel's about to turn." Her head turned slowly. The sunglasses hid her eyes, but not her irritation. "Excuse me?" "Wind's veering southeast," he continued evenly. "There's a squall forming past the shoals. You might want to postpone." A few members exchanged glances. One man laughed. "The dockhand's giving meteorology lessons now?" Another added, "Next he'll be commanding the fleet." Soft laughter rippled again. Victoria's smile tightened. "We appreciate your concern. But we have seasoned sailors aboard." He didn't flinch. "Seasoned isn't the same as prepared." Luca's hand slipped into his, small, steady, trusting. Harold shifted beside him. The boy's father might have a point, Victoria. She glanced at the older members, surprised by the interruption. "The forecast is clear." He nodded toward the horizon. "Forecasts don't update fast enough." The Commodore hesitated only a fraction of a second before turning back to the departing yacht. Pride outweighed precaution. "Silver Crest, proceed," she called over the handheld radio. The yacht cleared the marina mouth, sails rising cleanly into the wind. Applause followed. Champagne glasses lifted again. He exhaled slowly. The dock vibrated faintly under his boots as a deeper gust rolled in. The halyards began slapping harder now. A nearby skiff knocked twice against its fender. "Dad," Luca whispered, "is it bad?" "Not yet." He watched the angle of the mainsail as Silver Crest turned into the outer channel. The wind caught it too full, too fast. The vessel heeled more than it should have for a demonstration cruise. On the terrace, someone cheered at the dramatic lean. He didn't. "If you're still watching," he said quietly to no one in particular, eyes never leaving the horizon, "subscribe now, because in a few minutes, laughter's going to turn into panic." The breeze stiffened again, colder this time, carrying the metallic scent that precedes rain over salt water. Harold's cane tapped once against the dock. "You're certain?" "Yes." The sky darkened in a thin line, almost invisible unless you knew how to read it. He'd read worse. Much worse. Victoria remained near the radio, posture straight, confidence unbroken. "Textbook departure," she announced to the gathered families. As if on cue, the radio crackled, static first, then a strained voice. "Crest to Marina, we're picking up heavier gusts than expected." The terrace fell quiet. Victoria lifted the radio smoothly. "Adjust your trim and maintain heading." Another burst of static, steering sluggish, his jaw tightened. Rudder response delayed, the voice continued. We're drifting north toward the shoals. Murmurs spread across the dock. Victoria's composure thinned slightly. Correct your course immediately. We're trying. The wind hit harder, this time strong enough to send a folded brochure skittering across the planks at Luca's feet. The Silver Crest's bow angled dangerously toward the rocky inlet just beyond the safe channel. A narrow strip of water separated elegance from impact. Dad, Luca's voice carried a new edge now. He squeezed his son's hand once, then released it gently. Stay with Mr. Bennett. Harold's eyes met his. A silent understanding passed between them. Victoria pressed the radio closer. Activate auxiliary power, engines not engaging. Came the reply, panic bleeding through the static. We've lost propulsion. A sharp gasp rippled through the terrace. Donors lowered their glasses. Children stopped whispering. He stepped toward the nearest safety skiff, already calculating distance, drift speed, wind angle. The squall line reached the breakwater, rain speckling the surface in sudden bursts. Victoria turned toward him, alarm overtaking pride. What are you doing? Buying them time. You're not authorized. They don't need authorization, he said calmly. They need stabilization. The skiff's motor sputtered as he pulled the cord once, twice. It roared to life on the third pull, vibrating beneath his grip. Rain began falling in earnest now, sharp against skin and wood. Silver Crest tilted again, too close to the rocks. On the terrace, the laughter had vanished, and the sea had taken over. Rain struck the marina in hard, slanting sheets, blurring the horizon into a gray wall. The Silver Crest pitched violently as another gust slammed into her starboard side. From the terrace came a collective intake of breath, the sound thin against the rising wind. He guided the skiff out of its slip with steady hands, engine growling beneath him. Water slapped hard against the hull as he cut toward the channel. Every movement was deliberate, no wasted motion, no panic. Behind him, Victoria's voice carried across the dock. You can't just take a vessel. He didn't turn around. Watch me. Harold's cane thudded once against the planks as the older man held Luca close. The boy's eyes never left his father. The skiff bounced hard over the first swell outside the breakwater. Spray hit his face, cold and bracing. He adjusted throttle and angle instinctively, aligning the bow to cut clean through the chop instead of fighting it. Over the marina radio, Silver Crest's captain shouted again. We're losing lateral control. Rudders jammed. Drop anchor. Victoria called uselessly into the static. Anchor won't hold in this current. He scanned the waterline. The tide was turning faster than they realized. Outgoing current plus crosswind meant drift acceleration toward the shoals. They had minutes, maybe less. He grabbed the handheld radio clipped inside the skiff console and switched to open channel. His voice came calm, measured. Silver Crest, this is marina support. Cut sail to half-mast immediately. Ease tension on the main sheet. There was a pause on the other end. Who is this? Do it, he repeated. Now. The order cut through panic because it wasn't loud. It was certain. On the yacht, figures scrambled. The mainsail slackened slightly, reducing the heel. It wasn't enough, but it was something. He calculated distance again. Wind at 30 knots and climbing. Drift vector north-northeast. Rock face less than 100 yards beyond safe margin. He accelerated. Behind him, sirens wailed faintly from inside the marina office. Someone had finally called the Coast Guard. Good. But they wouldn't make it in time unless the yacht held position. The skiff crested another swell and dropped hard, hull shuddering. He adjusted trim with quick precision, eyes locked on the distressed vessel. Dad, Luca's voice echoed in his memory, not in fear, but in faith. That steadied him more than the engine beneath his hands. Over the radio, Silvercrest's captain sounded strained. "We can't maintain heading." "You don't need heading," he replied. "You need drag." "What?" "Deploy your spare line off the port stern. I'm coming alongside." The rain intensified, drumming against fiberglass and wood. Visibility narrowed to a tunnel of gray. Victoria's voice cut across the dock behind him, distant now. "This is reckless." Harold answered her sharply for once. "It's necessary." The skiff reached the yacht's wake just as another gust shoved Silvercrest dangerously close to the rocks. He could see the white churn where water smashed against stone. He angled the skiff's bow, timing the swell. "On my mark," he said into the radio. "Throw the line." A coil arced through the rain. He caught it cleanly, looping it around the skiff's stern cleat in one fluid motion. "Secure it." He barked. The yacht crew obeyed without question now. He gunned the throttle carefully, not to tow, but to pivot. Using the smaller vessel as a drag anchor, he created lateral resistance against the drift. The line snapped tight. For a heartbeat, nothing changed. Then the yacht's sideways slide slowed, just enough. He adjusted angle again, engine straining under the load. The skiff vibrated violently, but he held steady, countering wind with throttle bursts and subtle steering corrections. "Ease your sail more," he ordered. They complied. The yacht's bow began to respond, inching away from the worst of the rocks. On the dock, gasps replaced laughter entirely. Rain plastered his shirt to his back. His hands moved automatically, muscle memory taking over where fear might have lived. He'd been here before. Different waters, different stakes. Same physics. "Maintain tension," he said calmly. "Don't fight the current, ride it out." The squall peaked with a roar that swallowed everything else. For a terrifying moment, both vessels disappeared behind a curtain of rain. Then the gust passed. Not gone, but diminished. The yacht drifted clear of immediate danger, now angled back toward deeper channel water. He didn't celebrate, he recalculated. Over the radio, a new voice cut in, professional, sharp. "Unidentified support vessel, this is Coast Guard Cutter Raleigh approaching from South Sector. Identify yourself." He glanced toward the gray outline of a cutter breaking through the rain. "Marina support," he replied evenly. "Stabilizing civilian craft. Rudder jammed, propulsion lost." A pause. Then the Coast Guard voice again, closer now. "Understood. Hold position. We'll take tow." He nodded once to himself. On the dock, through the thinning rain, he could see Victoria standing frozen, hands gripping the railing. The laughter was gone. Only the sea remained, and it had chosen who was in command. The Coast Guard cutter carved through the fading squall like a blade, its hull steady where the smaller boats bucked. Orange and white against gray water, it carried authority that didn't need applause. He kept the skiff angled against the dragline, muscles taut, eyes scanning both vessels and the shifting current. "Support vessel, maintain tension," the cutter's commander instructed over the radio. "We're coming to the starboard side." "Copy," he answered evenly. The Silvercrest's crew clung to rails and rigging, soaked and shaken. The once proud demonstration yacht now looked fragile, canvas slack, hull streaked with spray and panic. On the dock, club members huddled under awnings, silent. He adjusted the throttle again, easing pressure just enough for the cutter to close the gap without snapping the line. Timing mattered now. Too much force, and the cleat would shear. Too little, and the yacht would yaw back toward danger. "Ease 2 degrees port," he called. The captain aboard Silvercrest obeyed instantly. No hesitation now. No ego. The Coast Guard threw a heavy tow line across. It landed cleanly on the yacht's deck. Crew secured it under the cutter's guidance. "Support vessel, you can release," the Coast Guard voice came through again. He waited half a second longer, confirming tension transfer from skiff to cutter. Then he unlooped the dragline and backed the skiff away smoothly. The Silver Crest straightened under official tow, guided toward safe water with practiced precision. Only then did he allow himself a slow exhale. Rain thinned to mist. Wind softened to a restless breeze. The crisis had shifted from survival to aftermath. He steered the skiff back toward the marina, engine humming lower now. As he approached the dock, dozens of eyes followed him. The same eyes that had smirked earlier. He cut the motor and secured the line with efficient hands. For a moment, no one spoke. Water dripped from his sleeves onto polished planks that had never known grease or grit. His boots left wet prints across the immaculate dock. Victoria descended the steps from the terrace slowly, composure returning in fragments. But something in her expression had changed, less rigid, less certain. "That was dangerous," she said carefully. "Yes," he replied. "You could have capsized." "Yes." A flicker of frustration crossed her face. "You acted without authorization." He met her gaze calmly. The rocks didn't need authorization. Harold let out a quiet breath that almost sounded like a laugh. Behind them, the Coast Guard cutter eased into the marina entrance, towing Silver Crest behind it like a humbled trophy. Sirens cut off as they neared. Crew members moved with disciplined efficiency, securing lines, assessing damage. The cutter's ramp lowered. A tall woman in command uniform stepped onto the dock, cap brim shadowing sharp, focused eyes. Commander Elise Navarro. She scanned the scene once, taking in the wet planks, the shaken yacht crew, the marina staff clustered near the edge. Then her gaze landed on him. It held there. Recognition sparked before words did. She walked toward him through the quiet crowd, boots striking the dock with crisp authority. Victoria straightened instinctively, expecting the commander's attention. Instead, Navarro stopped directly in front of the dockhand. For a heartbeat, the marina held its breath. The commander studied him openly, rain still clinging to his hair, shirt soaked, hand steady. "Well," she said, voice low but carrying. "I wondered if that was you." A few club members exchanged confused looks. He inclined his head slightly. "Commander," Victoria's eyes flicked between them. Navarro stepped back half a pace, not in dismissal, but in respect. "Former Chief Petty Officer Caleb Mercer," she said clearly enough for everyone on the dock to hear. "Rescue swimmer. Sector Atlantic." The words hit the air like a flare. Murmurs rippled outward. Luca pushed forward from Harold's side, eyes wide. Victoria blinked once. "Rescue swimmer?" Navarro didn't look away from him. Decorated for 3 offshore extractions during Hurricane Elias. Saved 14 lives in one night. Silence deepened. He shifted slightly, uncomfortable with the attention. It was a team effort. The commander's mouth curved faintly. "It always is." She removed her cap. And then, in full view of the yacht club members who had laughed less than an hour ago, Commander Elise Navarro raised her hand in a crisp, formal salute. It cut through the marina, sharper than the earlier wind. Gasps followed. Even Harold straightened instinctively. He hesitated only a fraction of a second, old instinct battling humility, before returning the salute with equal precision. The gesture was brief. But it changed everything. Victoria stood motionless, the weight of public reversal settling across her shoulders. The dockhand they'd told to stay behind the ropes had just been honored by the Coast Guard, and every single person on that dock had witnessed it. The salute still hung in the air like the echo of a bell long after their hands lowered. Rain dripped from the marina awnings in uneven rhythms. The Silver Crest, now secured under Coast Guard supervision, looked smaller somehow, less invincible. Luca broke the silence first. "You were in the Coast Guard?" he asked, staring up at his father as if seeing him in a new light. He crouched slightly, meeting his son's eyes. "Yeah. You never told me you saved people in hurricanes." A faint breath escaped him. "I didn't want it to be about that." Commander Navarro stepped closer, her presence firm but not intrusive. "He didn't just save people," she said gently. "He led teams through water most seasoned captains won't even enter." Victoria's composure fractured at the edges. "Why are you working as a dockhand?" she asked, the question more fragile than accusatory now. He stood again, water still dripping from his sleeves. "Because the sea doesn't disappear when you leave the service, and neither does responsibility." Navarro's gaze softened. "You left after Elias." He nodded once. "Injury?" she asked quietly. "Rotator cuff," he replied. "Enough to end deployment clearance. Not enough to keep me off the water." A murmur rippled through the members gathered near the terrace. The narrative was shifting under their feet. If you're still watching this unfold, subscribe now, because what happens next isn't about applause, it's about accountability. Victoria glanced toward the damaged yacht, then back at him. "My nephew was on that vessel. I know. You could have let the Coast Guard handle it." He shook his head slightly. "They were minutes out. The rocks weren't." Harold stepped forward, leaning heavily on his cane. "You warned us." Victoria closed her eyes briefly. The memory was unavoidable. "Yes," she admitted. "He did." The weight of that public acknowledgement settled over the dock. Navarro turned toward the gathered members. "For the record, if Mr. Mercer hadn't stabilized that vessel before we arrived, you'd be looking at hull breach and possible casualties." The word casualties hit harder than the earlier laughter. Silence deepened. Luca's small hand found his father's again. "You knew it would turn bad," the boy said softly. He squeezed gently. "I felt it." Navarro studied him a moment longer. "Sector Atlantic could use someone like you back in advisory capacity," she said. "Storm training, civilian marina coordination." Victoria stiffened slightly at the implication that her club had required outside intervention. He met the commander's gaze calmly. "I've got other priorities." Navarro glanced at Luca and nodded knowingly. Understood. A breeze moved through the marina, calmer now, carrying the scent of wet rope and humbled pride. Victoria stepped forward, her voice measured. "Mr. Mercer, Caleb, I owe you more than thanks." He didn't respond immediately. "Because this wasn't about gratitude. It's not about me," he said evenly. "Your safety protocols are outdated. No squall response drill. No cross-current contingency. You launched into unstable tide." Several board members shifted uncomfortably. Victoria absorbed the critique without deflection this time. "You're right, the admission was quiet but seismic." Harold's cane tapped lightly. "Perhaps it's time the club listens to experience instead of titles." A few members nodded reluctantly. Navarro replaced her cap. "I'll file my report noting civilian intervention prevented structural damage. I suggest you consider appointing him as safety consultant." The words hung there. Victoria hesitated only a moment before speaking. "Would you consider advising us?" He looked out over the water first. The squall had passed, leaving the harbor reflective and deceptively calm. "I'll consider it," he said. "For compensation," she added quickly. He shook his head once. For preparedness, Luca looked up at him, pride radiating from his small frame. "Does this mean I can still do the sailing thing?" A few nearby parents flushed faintly. Victoria met the boy's eyes. "It means," she said carefully, "you're officially invited to join." The rope barrier near the cleat suddenly felt ridiculous. Harold bent slightly toward Luca. "Legacy isn't just inheritance, son. Sometimes it's example." The boy nodded solemnly. Navarro gave him one final look. "Good to see you steady, Chief." "Always," he replied. The commander turned back toward her cutter, issuing crisp instructions as crew secured final lines. The marina remained quiet, not with shock now, but with reflection. He felt dozens of eyes on him again, but the weight had changed. Respect didn't roar, it settled. And for the first time that afternoon, the sea was calm enough to hear it. The marina held its silence a moment longer, as if even the gulls understood something had shifted. The silver crest rocked gently now under secure lines, no longer a symbol of effortless wealth, but a reminder of how quickly control can slip. Victoria stood facing him, rain drying against her blazer, pride replaced by something far more complicated. "You were right," she said again, this time not to the crowd, but to him. He nodded once. "The water usually is." A faint, almost unwilling smile touched Harold's face. Navarro stepped back toward the cutter, but not before turning slightly. "Chief," she called, voice carrying just enough. "Your lateral pivot was textbook. You haven't lost it." A ripple moved through the dock at that word. "Chief." Victoria glanced sharply at him. "You held rank?" "For a while," he replied simply. "And you never mentioned it?" He shrugged lightly. Didn't seem relevant. The Commodore looked around at the gathered members, at the terrace where laughter had echoed less than an hour ago. Several avoided her eyes now. Others studied him openly, recalibrating their assumptions. "The club prides itself on excellence," she said slowly. And yet today, excellence stood behind a service rope. The words weren't defensive, they were an admission. Harold shifted his weight. Pride can cloud judgment. Victoria inhaled deeply, then faced the group fully. "Effective immediately, Silvercrest's ceremonial program is suspended pending safety review. We will establish a formal storm protocol and advisory board." Murmurs passed through the members. She turned back to him. "If you're willing," he glanced at Luca first. The boy's eyes shone, not because of applause, but because of recognition. "I'm willing to help," he said. "But not as a token." Victoria's jaw tightened slightly. "As what, then?" "As someone who speaks when something's wrong and gets heard." A pause. Then she nodded. "Agreed." If you believe real leadership means admitting mistakes, subscribe now, because this is where transformation begins. Navarro's crew completed their final checks. The cutter's engines rumbled softly in preparation to depart. Before boarding, the commander stepped toward Luca and knelt slightly to his level. "Your dad's one of the best rescue swimmers I've ever worked with," she said gently. Luca's chest swelled. "He says it was a team." Navarro smiled faintly. "That's how you know it's true." She rose, gave him one final nod, and returned to her vessel. As the cutter eased away from the dock, members of the yacht club stood watching, not with entitlement, but with awareness. Victoria walked toward the rope barrier near the cleat. For a second she simply stared at it. Then she bent down, unhooked it from its post, and coiled it neatly in her hands. The gesture was small, but it carried weight. She handed the rope to a staff member. "Remove it." Luca noticed immediately. "Dad, look." He followed his son's gaze. The invisible boundary had just been made literal, and then undone. Harold stepped closer. "You ever think you'd see that rope come down?" He shook his head slightly. "Didn't matter if I did." "Why's that?" "Because it only exists if we accept it." The older man smiled. Victoria approached again, this time without distance. "Your application for the Youth Sailing Scholarship," she said carefully, addressing Luca directly. "It will be reviewed today." "Thank you, ma'am," the boy replied, voice steady. She hesitated, then added, "And regardless of outcome, you're welcome on these docks." The sincerity felt real. The dock crew, men who had worked alongside him for months, watched from near the maintenance shed. One gave a subtle nod, another clapped him once on the shoulder as he passed. No fanfare, just acknowledgement. The sky had cleared almost completely now, streaks of sunlight cutting through retreating clouds. The harbor shimmered again, but differently, less decorative, more honest. Victoria folded her hands in front of her. "I misjudged you." He met her gaze without bitterness. "You misjudged the uniform." A quiet breath escaped her. "Yes, and you corrected it." The words landed gently but firmly. Harold tapped his cane once more. "That's what matters." Across the marina, children began whispering again, but now the whispers were about rescues and storms, not status. Luca looked up at him. "Can we still learn to sail?" He smiled faintly. "We just did." The sea lapped softly against the dock, as if sealing the moment. Respect hadn't been demanded. It had been earned. And this time, no one was laughing. The dock settled into a strange, reflective quiet. Conversations resumed in low tones, stripped of their earlier arrogance. The Silvercrest's crew moved carefully across the deck, inspecting rigging and rudder with new humility. The word legacy no longer floated as confidently through the air. He stood near the edge of the marina, eyes drifting over the water that had nearly claimed the yacht. The tide had turned fully now, current smoothing into a slower, predictable rhythm. The sea always moved on. Luca stayed close at his side, still processing what he had witnessed. "You were a chief," the boy said softly, almost testing the title. For a while he replied, "Why didn't you ever tell me?" He looked down at his son, weighing the answer. "Because I didn't want you thinking respect comes from rank. Where does it come from?" He nodded toward the harbor. From showing up when it matters, Harold approached again, cane steady against the planks. "The board's gathering inside," he said quietly. "Emergency meeting." Victoria stood a short distance away, speaking with two senior members. Her posture was no longer defensive. It was deliberate. "She's going to ask you formally," Harold added. "For what?" "To lead safety review." He exhaled slowly. "I don't need a title." "Maybe not," Harold replied, "but the club needs direction." Across the dock, maintenance crew began resetting lines and coiling ropes disturbed by the squall. The smell of wet canvas lingered, mixing with diesel and salt. Familiar, honest. Victoria finally stepped toward them. "Mr. Mercer," she said, voice steady but changed. "We're convening the board. I would like you present." He studied her carefully. There was no condescension left, only accountability. "On one condition," he said. Her brow lifted slightly. "Which is?" "That this isn't symbolic." A faint crease formed between her eyes. "Explain." "I won't sit at a table just so the club can say it consulted the dockhand who saved a yacht." Several members nearby shifted uncomfortably. "I'll sit there," he continued, "if you're prepared to change procedures." Mandatory storm drills. Channel current briefings before launch. Real authority to halt departures. Silence hung heavy. Victoria didn't look away. "You'll have it." Harold nodded once, approval clear. Luca squeezed his father's hand again. "Does that mean you're in charge?" He smiled faintly. "No. It means I get to speak." The boy seemed to consider that carefully, then nodded as if it made perfect sense. Inside the clubhouse, board members began filing toward the conference room. Polished shoes tapped against hardwood floors. The same space where scholarship applications were reviewed, now prepared for something far more urgent. Before following, he glanced back at the water one more time. He'd stood on docks like this before, after rescues, after storms, after losses. Recognition never changed the tide. It only changed perception. Victoria paused beside him as they approached the clubhouse doors. "When you warned me earlier," she said quietly, "why didn't you insist harder?" He considered that. Because people don't hear what they're not ready to, he replied. She absorbed the truth of that. And today? She asked. Today you were? Inside, the boardroom felt smaller than the open marina. Framed photographs of past Commodores lined the walls, generations of tradition staring down at the present. Victoria took her seat at the head of the table. Then she looked to him. Please, she said, gesturing to a chair not at the end, but beside her. The room noticed. A few members exchanged glances. Others straightened in their seats. He didn't rush to sit. He moved deliberately, boots echoing faintly on polished wood that had never known saltwater stains. Luca remained near the doorway with Harold, watching. As he took the offered chair, the weight of the moment wasn't triumph. It was responsibility. Victoria cleared her throat. Today exposed vulnerabilities in our procedures, she began. And our assumptions. No one argued. She turned toward him. You have the floor. He looked around the table once, at faces that had laughed, dismissed, underestimated. His voice remained steady. The sea doesn't care about status, he said. It only responds to preparation. The room leaned in. We were unprepared. No defensiveness rose, only quiet acceptance. We fix that now, he continued. Or next time, we won't be this lucky. Outside the clubhouse windows, the harbor glinted in fresh sunlight, deceptively peaceful. But inside, something far more powerful than weather had shifted. Authority had changed shape. And for the first time in the yacht club's history, it wasn't determined by inheritance. It was determined by competence. The boardroom held that truth in uneasy silence. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, catching dust in the air and glinting off framed photographs of past Commodores, men in pressed whites, women in tailored blazers, generations built on tradition. He sat beside Victoria, boots planted firmly on polished wood that had rarely known the weight of labor. The contrast wasn't lost on anyone in the room. We begin with launch authority, he said evenly. No vessel leaves harbor without cross-checking live wind shift, tide change, and barometric drop. A senior member cleared his throat. We've relied on forecast apps for years, and today that nearly cost lives, he replied. No anger, just a fact. Victoria nodded once. We implement his protocol immediately. Murmurs of agreement followed, some reluctant, some relieved. Harold leaned back slightly, cane resting across his knees. It's time. He outlined storm drills next, quarterly simulations, emergency tow training, radio coordination rehearsals with Coast Guard oversight. His tone never rose. It didn't need to. When he finished, the room was quiet in a different way than before. Any objections? Victoria asked. No one spoke. If you're still with this story, she added quietly, glancing at the gathered members before looking back at him, subscribe now, because change only matters if we follow through. A few smiles flickered at the unexpected phrasing, tension easing slightly. Victoria folded her hands. I misjudged you publicly. I'd like to correct that publicly. He shifted slightly in his chair. You already did, not fully, she stood. Through the wide glass doors behind her, the dock was visible, members still gathered, whispers circulating like tide patterns. Come with me, she said. He hesitated only briefly, then rose. They stepped back onto the marina where sunlight now shimmered against calm water. The rope barrier remained gone. Children leaned over railings, parents speaking in hushed tones. Victoria raised her voice, not sharply, but clearly. Members of Seabridge, she called. Today, we were reminded that experience does not always arrive dressed in expectation. The crowd shifted, eyes moving toward the dockhand beside her. Caleb Mercer prevented catastrophic damage to this marina, she continued, and he did so after warning us of conditions we dismissed. A few heads lowered slightly. She turned toward him, meeting his eyes for a brief moment before addressing the crowd again. Effective immediately, Mr. Mercer will serve as Seabridge's maritime safety advisor. The words carried across the dock. Not honorary, not decorative, official. Applause began hesitantly, then strengthened, genuine now, stripped of earlier superiority. He felt the weight of it without absorbing it. Because the only reaction that mattered stood near the front. Luca's face glowed, not with pride in status, but pride in example. Victoria stepped back half a pace. "Would you say a few words?" He glanced at the water first, then at the members who had laughed. His voice carried calmly across the dock. "The sea doesn't measure legacy," he said. "It measures readiness." Silence held steady. "Today we were lucky. Next time we won't rely on luck." He didn't embellish, didn't dramatize. He simply told the truth. Harold's cane tapped once in quiet approval. A younger parent stepped forward slightly. "Will there be open safety sessions for families?" "Yes," he answered immediately. "All families." The emphasis didn't go unnoticed. Victoria nodded. "Scholarship applications will also be reviewed without legacy waiting." A subtle shift rippled through the crowd at that. Luca blinked. "Really?" Victoria met the boy's gaze directly. Really. The air felt lighter now, not because the storm had passed, but because something else had been cleared. Navarro's cutter was already a distant silhouette on the horizon, but her salute lingered like a seal on the day. He felt something small brush against his hand. Luca pressed a tiny metal pin into his palm, an old Coast Guard insignia he'd found tucked in a drawer months ago. "You forgot this," the boy whispered. He looked down at the worn emblem, edges dulled with time. Symbolic. Not of rank, of service. He clipped it discreetly inside his jacket pocket, not displayed, but carried. Victoria noticed the gesture. "Thank you," she said quietly, "not just for the rescue, but for the lesson." He inclined his head slightly. The dock resumed its movement, but differently now. Conversations included him instead of circling around him. Crew members straightened with new purpose. Even the Silver Crest's polished hull seemed less imposing. Respect hadn't arrived with wealth. It had arrived with competence. And for the first time at Seabridge Yacht Club, those two weren't confused. The applause faded into conversation, but the tone had changed. It wasn't the polished murmur of status signaling anymore. It was quieter, thoughtful, measured. He stepped back toward the working side of the dock instinctively, toward coiled ropes and fuel drums and the maintenance shed that had always felt more honest than the terrace. A few members followed, not out of curiosity this time, but intention. Mr. Mercer, one of the board members, said, adjusting his cufflinks nervously, "How soon can we begin the drills?" "Tomorrow morning," he replied without hesitation. The man blinked. "Tomorrow?" The sea doesn't wait for scheduling convenience. That earned a small, embarrassed nod. Harold approached, slower now, but steady. "You didn't gloat," he observed. "There's nothing to gloat about," he answered. "You were mocked," he shrugged lightly. And then the wind shifted. Harold smiled faintly. "You're kinder than I would have been. Kindness isn't the point. What is?" "Competence," he said simply. Behind them, Luca traced the edge of the dock with his sneaker, watching gulls skim low over the water. Victoria stepped down from the terrace again, this time alone. Without sunglasses. Without the polished armor she'd worn earlier. "I meant what I said," she began. "About the scholarship review." He looked at her calmly. "He earned his written score, I know. And if he doesn't meet performance standards, he doesn't sail." She studied him carefully. "You're not asking for favoritism, I'm asking for fairness." The distinction landed. A breeze drifted through the marina, gentler now, carrying sunlight instead of threat. She folded her arms loosely. I built this club on tradition, she said quietly. But tradition isn't the same as wisdom. No, he agreed. It's memory. Wisdom adapts. Her gaze moved briefly toward the horizon where the Coast Guard cutter had disappeared. You could have embarrassed us, he considered that. The sea did that. And you could have let it. A beat of silence passed. I didn't do it for you, he said. I know. The honesty between them felt cleaner than any apology. If you're still here, subscribe now, because transformation doesn't end with one rescue. It continues in what we choose next. Victoria glanced toward the clubhouse doors where board members lingered, watching cautiously. I want you on the board, she said. He shook his head almost immediately. No, her eyebrows lifted. No? I'll advise. I'll train. I'll hold departures when conditions turn, but I won't sit in a chair that distances me from the dock. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Then we'll build a structure that doesn't. Luca jogged over, holding a folded brochure damp from earlier rain. Dad, look. They changed the schedule board. He followed his son's pointing finger. The chalkboard near the marina office had been updated. Under the heading Safety Oversight, a new line read, Maritime Advisor, C. Mercer. No honorary flourish, no exaggerated title, just responsibility. Luca grinned. That's you, he gave a small smile. Looks like it. A younger dockhand approached hesitantly. Hey, Chief, he said awkwardly, unsure of the right term. He chuckled softly. Caleb's fine. The crewman nodded, relief visible. We've got a loose cleat on slip 7. Thought you might want to check it. I do. Victoria watched as he moved toward the working end of the marina without ceremony. Not toward the applause, toward the repair. That's why he belongs here, Harold murmured beside her. She didn't argue. He knelt beside the cleat, tightening bolts with steady precision. The act was small compared to what had happened, but it mattered just as much, because storms weren't the only danger. Neglect was quieter. Luca crouched beside him. You're still fixing stuff, the boy said. Always. Even after they saluted you? Especially after. The boy considered that seriously. Across the dock, members resumed normal routines, but there was awareness now. Conversations included talk of drills and preparedness instead of only regattas and galas. Victoria stood at the terrace railing, watching the marina not as a stage, but as a system. She called down to him one last time that afternoon. Mr. Mercer. He looked up. Thank you, she said, not formally, not performatively, just truthfully. He nodded once. Then returned to tightening the cleat, because respect, like seaworthiness, required maintenance. And this time the entire club understood that. The sun dipped lower over the marina, casting long amber streaks across the water. The earlier storm felt distant now, reduced to damp planks and folded sails left to dry. But its lesson lingered like salt on skin. He stood at the edge of slip 7, testing the tightened cleat with a firm pull. Solid. Reliable. The kind of detail no one notices until it fails. Luca hovered nearby, watching with quiet admiration. Why does that one matter? The boy asked. Because when the wind pulls hardest, he said, tugging the rope once more, this holds everything steady. Luca nodded as if absorbing something bigger than hardware. From the terrace, Victoria descended again, this time carrying a binder instead of authority. She approached without hesitation, heels clicking lightly against the dock. We've scheduled the first safety drill for Saturday, she said. Mandatory attendance. Good, he replied, wiping his hands on a cloth. Some members are unsettled. By change? Yes. He glanced toward the clubhouse where a small cluster of senior members spoke in tight circles. Unsettled isn't the same as opposed, he said calmly. They just haven't felt the rocks yet. She exhaled softly. You have a way of saying things that make discomfort unavoidable. That's the point. The marina crew moved with renewed purpose. Dockhands double-checked lines. Radios were tested. A new weather monitor was being mounted near the office window. Harold approached slowly, surveying the activity. "Haven't seen this much practical energy here in years," he observed. Victoria allowed herself a faint smile. "Neither have I." He looked at her directly. "You're handling this well. I nearly didn't." "But you did." A beat of silence passed between them. Not strained, but reflective. If you've stayed with this story, subscribe now, because the real test of respect isn't applause. It's follow-through. A black SUV rolled into the marina parking lot. Several board members stepped out, dressed sharply, expressions cautious. They approached the dock together, stopping a few feet away from him. "Mr. Mercer," one began, clearing his throat, "we'd like to discuss liability." He straightened slowly, meeting their gaze without tension. "Safety reduces liability," he said. "Yes, but your intervention today prevented a hull breach," he finished. Another board member shifted. "And we're grateful, truly. But some donors feel the public nature of the salute altered perceptions." He tilted his head slightly. "Of what?" "Of hierarchy." The word hung in the air. He didn't react with anger. "Hierarchy doesn't stabilize a vessel in 30-knot winds," he said evenly. Silence followed. Victoria stepped beside him, not behind, not above. "He's correct," she said firmly. Our perception needed altering. The board members exchanged glances, realizing the alignment had shifted. "We're proposing a formal advisory contract," one offered quickly. "Compensation commensurate with—" "I don't need a contract to act when something's wrong," he replied. "But structure ensures consistency," Victoria added gently. He considered that. "Fine," he said, "but include dock crew training in the agreement. Not just members." The board member blinked. "Dock crew?" "Yes." A pause, then a reluctant nod. "Agreed." Luca tugged lightly at his father's sleeve. "Does that mean everyone learns together?" He smiled faintly. "That's the idea." The SUV doors closed softly behind the board members as they returned to their meeting inside. Their posture was less rigid now, less insulated. Victoria remained. "You could have leveraged this differently," she said quietly. "How?" "Title. Influence. Prestige." He glanced out over the water again. "Prestige doesn't interest me. What does?" He looked down at Luca. "Belonging." Her expression softened. Across the marina, children began running along the dock again, laughter returning, but lighter now, less sharp. The chalkboard schedule near the office had already been updated again. Storm drill, Saturday, 0800 hours. Lead. Maritime advisor. The handwriting wasn't ornate. It was practical. He felt a hand slip into his again. "Dad," Luca said softly, "I wasn't embarrassed when they laughed." He looked down, surprised. "I knew you'd know what to do." The words landed deeper than applause ever could. He squeezed the boy's hand once. Victoria watched the exchange quietly. "I'm glad you stayed," she said. "So am I," he replied. The harbor reflected the setting sun in molten streaks, deceptively calm once more. But beneath that surface, something fundamental had changed. Respect no longer flowed in one direction. It moved like the tide, earned, tested, and real. The marina glowed under the last stretch of sunset, amber light sliding across polished hulls and weathered pilings alike. The storm had scrubbed the sky clean, and with it, something inside the yacht club felt newly exposed. He stood near the harbor office as dockhands mounted the final bracket for the upgraded wind gauge. The small device blinked to life, numbers steady and clear, not decorative, functional. Victoria approached quietly, no entourage this time. "The contract draft is ready," she said, holding out a folder. You can review it tonight." He took it, but didn't open it immediately. "What's in it?" Authority to delay launches, mandatory drill enforcement. Direct line to the Coast Guard sector office. He raised an eyebrow slightly. "You move fast. I learned something about delay today," she replied. He nodded once. Harold joined them, leaning against the railing overlooking the channel. "I've been part of this club for 37 years, the older man said. "Never seen a rope come down before. It shouldn't have been there," he answered. "No," Harold agreed. "It shouldn't." Across the dock, Luca sat on an overturned bucket near the maintenance shed, watching the crew test emergency flares under supervision. He wasn't playing. He was learning. Victoria followed his gaze. "He's observant. He has to be." She looked back at him. "You didn't correct me earlier when I called this club mine." He tilted his head slightly. "It is yours. And now it belongs to whoever protects it." The words didn't sting. They settled. "If you've walked this far with us, subscribe now, because legacy isn't inherited. It's rebuilt." The boardroom lights flickered on inside the clubhouse. Members moved through the glass doors carrying binders instead of wine glasses. The visual contrast was stark. Victoria exhaled slowly. "I've been thinking about the salute." He said nothing. "It wasn't just for you," she continued. "It was for what we overlooked." He studied her expression carefully. There was no defensiveness left, only reflection. "Recognition doesn't erase earlier words," he said gently. "I know, but what you do next matters more." She nodded. A younger member approached hesitantly, holding a clipboard. "We're organizing volunteers for Saturday's drill. Should we include the junior sailors?" "Yes," he answered immediately. Victoria didn't hesitate. "Absolutely." The member scribbled notes and hurried off. Harold tapped his cane once. "You've shifted the culture in a single afternoon." He shook his head. "The storm did." "Storms expose," Harold replied. "People decide what to do with it." A quiet settled between them again, comfortable now. Luca jogged over, cheeks flushed. "They let me help set up the life jackets." "Good," he said. "And Mr. Bennett says I can practice knot drills tomorrow. Then we'll be here." Victoria smiled faintly at the boy. "You'll make a fine sailor." Luca glanced at his father before answering. "Only if I earn it." She caught the nuance in that response. "Exactly," she said softly. The sun dipped fully below the horizon, leaving the marina bathed in twilight blues. Dock lights flickered on, casting reflections across calm water. He finally opened the folder in his hand, scanning the contract briefly. Clear language. No ornamental clauses. Practical authority. "You trust me with this?" he asked. Victoria didn't hesitate. "I trust results." He closed the folder again. "I'll hold you accountable to it," he said. "I expect you to." The air felt cooler now, but steady, predictable. Navarro's earlier salute replayed in quiet memory, not as triumph but as reminder. Service didn't end when the uniform came off, it adapted. Luca leaned lightly against his side. "Are we staying late?" For a bit, the boy looked up at the clubhouse lights, then back at the water. "Today felt big," he said. "It was. Because of the rescue?" He thought about that. "No," he answered. "Because of what changed after." Luca nodded slowly, absorbing that truth. Across the marina, the chalkboard schedule remained visible in the lamplight. Storm drill, Saturday. All members. No exclusions. No ropes. Victoria followed his gaze. "I won't forget today," she said quietly. "You shouldn't." The harbor lay calm, tide steady, lines secure. But the greatest shift hadn't been in the wind. It had been in perspective. And this time, that change wasn't temporary. The marina settled into a deep, reflective quiet as night fully claimed the harbor. Dock lights cast long golden trails across the water, turning each ripple into a quiet shimmer. The silver crest rested securely in her slip, repaired and humbled. No champagne glasses, no applause. Just ropes tied correctly and lines checked twice. He walked the dock one final time before heading home, boots moving with familiar ease over weathered planks. Luca followed close behind, carrying a small coil of practice rope like it was treasure. "Are we coming back tomorrow?" the boy asked. "First light," he answered. "For drills?" "For responsibility." Luca seemed to like that word. Victoria stood near the clubhouse entrance watching them approach. The blazer was gone now. Her sleeves were rolled, hair pulled back loosely. Less Commodore, more steward. "I wanted to say this without an audience," she began. "You changed more than protocol today," he waited. "You changed me." There was no defensiveness left in her voice, only clarity. "You didn't need a salute to prove anything," she continued. "But I'm glad it happened where everyone could see." He glanced toward the dark water. "The sea's a better judge than people." "Maybe," she said softly. "But people can learn." He nodded once. Luca stepped slightly forward. "Will there still be ropes?" Victoria smiled faintly. "Only the ones that keep boats safe." The boy considered that answer carefully, then seemed satisfied. A breeze drifted through the marina, gentle and steady, nothing like the sharp edge from earlier, just enough to remind them the water was alive. "Tomorrow," Victoria said, "we begin rewriting the safety charter." "Tomorrow," he agreed. She extended her hand not as authority, but as equal. He shook it firmly. No applause this time, no spectacle, just understanding. They walked toward the parking lot together, father and son framed by dock lights and the quiet hum of tide against hull. Halfway there, Luca stopped and turned back toward the water. "Dad?" "Yeah?" "When they laughed, were you mad?" He paused. "No, why not?" "Because the sea doesn't laugh," he said gently. "It teaches." The boy nodded slowly, as if storing that lesson somewhere permanent. The SUV headlights in the lot blinked on one by one as members left, their conversations quieter than before. No more jokes about dockhands, no more whispered legacy rules, just talk of drills, preparedness, respect. He opened the passenger door for Luca, then looked back one last time at Seabridge Yacht Club. The rope barrier was gone. The chalkboard schedule glowed under a small lantern. Storm drill, all members. The word all felt different now. Earned. Luca buckled in and held up the small coil of rope proudly. "I'm going to practice every night." He smiled faintly. "Good. And one day," the boy added, "maybe someone will salute me too." He leaned against the car door, studying his son. "If they do," he said quietly, "make sure it's because you showed up when it mattered." The engine started softly. As they drove away from the marina, the harbor lights shrank behind them, but something larger remained. It wasn't the salute. It wasn't the appointment. It wasn't even the rescue. It was the moment laughter lost its power, and belonging took its place. If this story meant something to you, tell me the next title you want to see brought to life. Subscribe, and don't miss our next story, They Fired the Bus Driver, until the school board discovered who he really was. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?